Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of your Bish Therapist podcast. I am your host, Melissa Reich, your Bish Therapist, a real-life therapist turned pop culture aficionado, here to serve clinical interpretations and hot takes on all things pop culture. And as you can hear, your Bish is feeling much better. Yay! So today's episode is going to be a little bit longer, a little bit more in depth. Thankfully, I am feeling much better. Again, thank you all for your well wishes. People have been so sweet and kind and much appreciated. I am not 100% back to my baseline, which is still, not great, but I at least can talk without sounding like an elderly asthmatic woman who smoked for 100 years. Because that's what my therapist said I sounded like. And yes, so I'm feeling much better. I'm on the mend. I am very excited to bring you this episode today. So today's episode is going to be primarily about two different things. The first is going to be about Real Housewives of New Jersey, but not in the way you think. I have made the decision to not cover Real Housewives of New Jersey. And I announced it on my Instagram a couple of days ago. But for those of you who aren't on Instagram or, don't follow me, I mean, if you're on Instagram, you should follow me because I do a lot of what I do in the podcast just on Instagram. I kind of write out my thoughts on things and, I'm a good writer and it's just, people have said that it's interesting. So you're a Bish Therapist on Instagram. But Real Housewives of New Jersey, this is the first season that I've decided not to cover. And so I feel like I owe a little bit of an explanation as to why that is. And it's not an easy explanation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. I'm also going to talk a little bit about Summer House. And I have a couple little housekeeping things too. So let me get started with that. So the first little bit of housekeeping is that, as many of you know, that I kind of started this and I wasn't sure where it was going. And so I decided to do seasons of your Bish Therapist podcast, primarily because I can't physically, sometimes I just need a break. And as I've mentioned before, there are lots of content creators who are just amazing. They create so much content. They're hustlers, and I respect that very much. But for me, it's just not physically possible because with my body, I either take a break or it tells me, it decides for me that I'm taking a break, and that's much less preferable, not just for me, but I'm sure for you all. So here is the plan. My last episode will be on June 25th of the season 2 part for your Bish Therapist. So here's the good news on this. We still have 8 episodes for your Bish Therapist podcast leading up to the season 2 finale. Okay. And then for those of you who are new listeners, I do have a lot of new listeners, people joining all the time. Thank you so much. Season 1 has 16 episodes. And on my Instagram, I do have all of those episodes listed, season 1 and season 2. So everything I've done up until this point. Everything I've done, the links to it all is in my link tree. So my link tree is either wherever you're listening to this podcast, I put a link to my link tree in the podcast description. So you can look at that, or you can go to my Instagram, and the link tree has all the different links to every episode I've ever done, including tons of other things that I've done as well. And the other thing, the other bit of housekeeping is that in that link tree, there is a link to the Spreaker Supporters Club. So I apologize. People were very confused about where to find those extra episodes. So the Spreaker Supporters Club is kind of like Patreon, but Spreaker is the platform that I use. Okay. So I just thought it was easier to do that. And this week I'm going to be attending a webinar about the Spreaker Supporters Club, so I can make sure I'm getting and understanding all of the things that it has to offer, because I want to give everybody, I don't care how much people are paying, whether it's $1 or $5, I want to make sure everyone's getting what you can. So if you're a Spreaker supporter and you're confused about where to find the extra episode, you have to go to Spreaker, and then you have to find me there. You just search Your Bish Therapist, and then that's how you find it. But if you want a real easy link to click, it's in my Instagram, in my link tree, in my bio. At this point, I may decide to start a website. I'm not sure if that would be easier for people, but I am tech elderly and I don't know how to do that. So TBD. I'm doing the best I can. I'm a one-man band here, and, I'm an elder millennial. That's literally what I'm called. I was born in 81. So my generation has been called a lot of things, but elder millennial just seems to really fit because I do feel elderly in a lot of ways. But going back to the plan for finishing Your Bish Therapist season 2, here are the things that are still to come, because I promised and I teased and I did all these things, and then plagues happened and I just got off track. But still to come, I am going to cover The Curious Case of Natalia Grace, because holy moly, I've watched it. I have so many notes on it. I am going to do an episode on that. I also am going to cover Quiet on the Set. That might be the season finale of season 2. I'm not sure yet. I'm going to possibly cover Baby Reindeer. I did a poll on my Instagram, and a lot of the people said yes, they wanted me to cover it, but there were also equal amounts of people who said they haven't watched it. So, and the reason I want to cover it is because Baby Reindeer has been making the rounds. If you've never heard of it, it's been making the rounds on Netflix. But here's the thing. Huge trigger warnings. Baby Reindeer is very intense. It's very dark. And I love dark, intense stuff. And this was even a little like on the edge for me. There are trigger warnings to be had. Of course, they don't do anything about that on Netflix. They don't warn anybody, so I'm going to warn you now. But if you want me to cover Baby Reindeer, let me know. Some people, those of you who have let me know, I got it. I've received your feedback, but it's only been a couple of people. And so I'm just trying to, I don't want to cover something that a lot of people haven't seen or what have you. So question mark on that. But I'm going to continue to cover Summer House. I'm going to continue to cover The Valley. And I'm just not covering Jersey. So let's get into that now. Okay. Real Housewives of New Jersey. Why am I not covering it? Let me just say I have a lot of reasons for this, some of which I'm going to share and some of which I'm not going to. And for those of you who know me and kind of know what I do and why I do it, I think you can probably read between the lines, but I'm not going to be, I have to have self-preservation here, if I'm being honest. So the first main reason that I am not going to cover Jersey, I watched the season premiere last night. Okay. So I had my opinion of it. I watched the season premiere, and the season premiere told me that my decision was correct. There is nothing of clinical interest, on that show for me. So what I do is I take important concepts in Bravo mostly, but also the media, and I talk about, complicated grief and trauma and generational trauma and things like that. Now, last season for Jersey, I did a lot of posting about the Gorgas and the Giudice family, generational trauma, and I also have a podcast episode about that in season 1. So I have covered it. However, in my opinion, it's inauthentic toxicity that has really nothing of clinical significance to offer for my purposes. So the only clinical thing of interest it has is for me to talk about underlying pathology, and I'm not going to do that because I value my peace and I value my safety. And that's all I'm going to say specifically about that. I think that the show, so I have watched Jersey since season 1, episode 1. Okay, let me be clear about this. I've watched it from the beginning. I've seen every episode, and it used to be my most favorite Housewives franchise for many folks. It was because it was so real and raw and authentic, and you had these friendships. Like, let's not forget, when the show first started, it was, Caroline and Jacqueline and Teresa and Joe, and it was all of these real family dramas and real family relationships, and it was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. It was like no other Housewives franchise. But season 14 for me feels toxic. It feels inauthentic. And I'm going to share. So Carlos King recently did a podcast breaking some news about this franchise and how some of the cast members are doing some shady things behind the scenes. So I am going to talk a little bit about that. Because when I heard about this, it really just solidified for me that this didn't feel like the right thing to do to cover New Jersey. I don't want to support toxic mean girl behavior. And I did a post on Instagram about mean girl behavior and why it occurs and how, some of the underlying psychology behind it. But I think that, excuse me, I need to listen to my gut, and I need to listen to the fact that, doing what I do, I get a lot of grief constantly. Anything that I say upsets people, but that's okay, right? Because I can't please everybody, and not everybody's going to like me. I understand that. But Jersey feels a notch or two above the standard deviation of normal toxicity. And my piece is too important to me. So I'm going to share for you. I listened to Carlos King's podcast where he talks about, there's this account on Twitter. The account's name is Melissa's Old Nose, which I die. I mean, that is so mean. Because Melissa Gorga has, she's been honest. She's had, work done. And it's like, it's so funny to me that some people on that cast are so hard on other people about that when their face is morphing in ways that I don't even recognize. So that's wild to me. But Melissa's Old Nose is the account on Twitter, and it's run by a woman named Gabriella. And no, not one of Teresa's beautiful daughters. This is a different Gabriella. By the way, one thing I will say is, my God, does Teresa love those girls. Seeing those girls from when they were babies to now going off to college, I swear I've never felt more elderly in my life. Number one. And number two, you could say a lot about Teresa, but I just think she really loves those girls. She's such a good mom to them and just loves them so much. And, I think that's awesome. So Melissa's Old Nose on Twitter, what it is, it's a Teresa Giudice fan account who the fan account goes after everybody in the cast except for Teresa and Jen Aiden. So recently, what happened, the situation that happened was Melissa's Old Nose shared receipts. Yes, receipts, timeline, screenshot, emails, DMs. I mean, she shared it. She, as Bethany would say, she mentioned it all. She mentioned it all. And some of the receipts I'm going to share with you now. And now this is all alleged. Okay, what I am telling you, I've seen the screenshots. I'm gonna read you some of those, but this is all allegedly. Okay, This is alleged. So Gabriella, the woman who owns this account, claims that Teresa and Jen told her what to say about castmates and paid her to do so. Okay, this is what she's alleging. And apparently there's this whole issue. It's a little confusing, but I'm going to explain it to you. So Bravo celebrities get something called screeners. A screener, if you don't know what that is, it's a early release of the episode that usually they get like 3 days before the episode airs, so they can watch it, so they can be prepared in terms of their reactions and their rebuttals and, all of these other things. Now, the screeners are sent out to Bravo Labs. I don't get them. I'm not important, just to be really clear. There's lots of people I know who get them. I'm not one of them. I'm not that special. But the main thing about these screeners is that there is a confidentiality clause that you are not allowed to share the screeners. It's like, for those of you who are 43 or older, you probably remember, like, when you used to get those movies on LimeWire or whatever it is, it's like they had these piracy warnings. And young people have no idea what I'm talking about right now. But so it's kind of like a grown-up version of that. And apparently, Jen Aydin, there is an email that shows, allegedly, that Jen Aydin sent or forwarded that email with the screener to Gabriella from Melissa's Old Nose so that she could see what was going on and then have her attacks on Melissa and the rest of the cast ready. So what put Melissa's Old Nose on Twitter over the edge was, after she got this screener, I guess, Teresa claims on last night's episode, the premiere, and the reason I'm sharing this is it's relevant to the story, because it sounds like I'm covering it, but I'm not covering it. So Teresa claims that Frank and Brittany told her that everyone got together at Marge's house before the reunion to have a plan to go against her and Louie. Okay. Which, the funny thing is, Dolores said the one thing she did say last night was like, it is common to have a meeting of the minds, so to speak, before reunions. That's not uncommon. So when Teresa claimed that this was done in an attempt to malign she and Louie, Gabriella from Melissa's Old Nose said, and she did say this, you should see what they plant on their castmates behind the scenes. Stay tuned. Okay. And then Melissa's Old Nose on Twitter said, I've been quiet for a reason. And these are quotes. I've been quiet for a reason. A lot has been revealed. Everything we have been led to believe has been a lie. I'm truly disgusted by Jen Aydin and her camp's actions. I owe lots of apologies. Things were not what they were made out to be. Okay. So these receipts that she posted, they were a screenshot from the email production company that Jen forwarded these EPs to Gabriella. That was one of the receipts shared. Gabriella said that bots, people for a long time said that Teresa and Jen have bots that are programmed to, attack. And Gabriella said, that's correct. This is her quote. She said, Teresa and Jen were our masters. They told us what to say, how to say it, and assured me that we were doing it for the right reasons. Okay. So then Gabriella, Melissa's Old Nose, posted screenshots of an alleged DM, because again, listen, we all know that this stuff can be made up. So sometimes it's hard to know what to believe, but she shared an alleged DM from Jen Aydin to Gabriella. And by the way, it was at 4:30 a.m., which is the time of it all makes it to me the most unhinged. But so apparently Melissa's old nose got really upset with them, started posting these things, and Jen Aiden allegedly DM'd her a bunch of DMs saying, I need you to call me. What's going on? And then after Gabriella left her on read, which is basically she just ignored her and didn't answer, Jen Aiden allegedly said, I got you that stroller for your special needs child, shaking my head. How could you? What happened? You were one of the special ones. Can we talk? And was begging for her number. So I've seen some of these receipts. I've seen them. And what I'm reporting is what is contained in them. But what I'm saying is it's alleged because they could be AI, they could be fake. I don't know. But I tend to, I'm just reporting. This is the main reason why I am not covering Jersey, because it's just so gross. It's so messy. And to be honest, as a content creator, I'm like, well, what accounts do you trust and which ones don't you? I just don't know. So the last screenshot of an alleged DM, and this is a trigger warning because this is pretty vile. If it's true, Jen, the screenshot, it said, I'm not afraid of anyone, especially you. You burned such a bridge, you fucking pig. I spit on you. Okay, so here's where I'm going to stop talking about Jersey and start talking about the problem here, which is fan accounts will do anything for some fan accounts will do anything for reality stars. So it's like a relationship, like a host parasite relationship, in that there are people in the content creator space who will do anything so that someone will talk to them, right? And so for me, there's a very dangerous mix of blind loyalty and naivete, okay? And so when I'm hearing what Gabriella Melissa's old nose is saying is that she feels very duped. She thought, she was led to believe the whole time that Melissa or all these other people were the problem, and she's starting to kind of come out of this programming, essentially. This is what Gabriella is saying, essentially, that she felt she was programmed, and she's waking up and she's coming to, and now she's upset because she feels duped and used and all of these things. And so 2 things I'm going to talk about here, parasocial relationships, number 1, and number 2, healthy boundary setting. Because here's what I'm going to say that I know people are going to be frustrated by this. I've talked to many Bravo Labs, and I will never share who or what was said. And there are several reasons for that. Being in this content creator space feels truly like being back in high school. I'm going to share my experience, okay? There are accounts that are great. There are some accounts that are not so great, and they're mean, and it's catty, and it's high school, and it's mean girl, and it's all of these things. And here's the thing about me in high school. I'm just gonna say this. I didn't even tolerate this type of behavior in high school, or at any time in my life. I don't like drama, and I don't like mean people. I've just never been okay with that. And so growing up for me, when I was in high school and grade school and all these things, I valued kindness and authentic friendships. And so, as you can imagine, I've had a lot of heartache and heartbreak throughout the years because not everybody is capable of that. And so for me, I have always been a leader, but in friendship groups, I always called myself the floater. And I promise you this has a point. So as a floater, I would float in between many different groups of people because I never wanted to be a queen bee. And if I saw a queen bee in a group, I ran away as quickly as I possibly could. I don't like people who abuse power. I don't like people who are mean. I don't like people who put other people down. I've always been a loving, empathetic person who just won't stand for someone being treated badly in a group of people. I'm just not going to. And the same experience I had then, I have now. And I'm not going to say any names. I'm not going to call anybody out. This is not some sort of like expose or, shit talking session. It's just me sharing a peek behind the curtain of some of the ugly underbelly of some of these accounts. And I believe that Teresa and Jen and some other people on the cast have a lot of ugly underbelly and intentions. And, I'll use one small example. When Teresa and Jen were in the car and they made a really nasty comment about John Fuda having to do with a sex toy. And it was clear to me that the goal was two things: to disparage him based on kink shaming or slut shaming or whatever. But the other part of it that really solidified my decision is that there was this undertone of, oh, he's gay. So, and it's like, how old are you two? Like, are you adults? You're gonna insinuate that insinuating somebody's gay. That's not an insult to me. Being gay isn't an insult, but it tells me a lot about their mindset. And as an advocate and an ally, I don't appreciate the using this ridiculous, clearly made up gossip to undermine John Fuda and also to like insinuate that he's gay. It's just gross. Okay. I'm going to say that. It's gross. It's icky. It's toxic. It isn't fun anymore. And the fans also have become extremely toxic. The people that I have seen cover this, it's mayhem. And I respect my peace. And I can't, it's jumped the shark. Jersey has jumped the shark. That's all I can say about that. So let me talk a little bit about the parasocial relationships and how sometimes these fan accounts, in my opinion, get into the nitty gritty with some of these Bravo Labs. Because like I said, I have been approached by people. And for me, I have a very strong moral compass that I'm not susceptible to being manipulated. I'm just not. Thanks to a lifetime of stuff. There's no manipulating me. I am strong in my convictions. I know who I am. I know what I'm doing. It really is a blessing. And I'm grateful for it. So, but some of these accounts, right? Like imagine you DMing with Teresa or Jen, or you see some of these people on TV and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm talking to these people. It feels really important and special. And so a parasocial relationship is essentially a one-sided relationship that a media user has with a media persona. And it's I chose a general broad descriptor because it used to be mostly with TV stars, when you would see people who were stalkers, who, like, for example, Baby Reindeer, the part that goes behind stalking and that high level of feeling like you know someone is parasocial relationships. So right now, as I'm talking, I have parasocial relationships with people. People listen to me every week. And some of them reach out to me, and some of them I DM with, and some of them I talk to, and some of you I don't. Some of you don't reach out to me, and that's perfectly fine. But you know me, and I don't know you, is my point. And I want to share a little bit about, so there's two important factors here. The one is that there's a difference, research has shown there's a difference between a parasocial interaction and a parasocial relationship. So recently, some studies have concluded that although a parasocial interaction and relationships are related, they are different concepts. Parasocial attachments form similar to attachments in real life. And so an important component of parasocial interactions and attachments is what's called proximity seeking. So proximity seeking is where people want to be in the vicinity or proximity of a Bravo lab or a media persona or a famous person or someone they've seen on TV, a podcaster. There's so much media today. There's a million different explanations of this. But the wild thing to keep in mind here is that these parasocial attachments form. So Bowlby, he is famous for talking about attachment theory. And attachment theory is essentially how we form basic attachments growing up to our caregivers, to, and it's not always parents, it's, different caregivers, and not everyone has, not everyone's raised by nuclear parents. Okay. The wild thing about everything that I'm talking about is that the proximity in parasocial attachments is achieved through means like rewatching a particular show over and over, right? Like a comfort show, which, by the way, I do this all the time. I rewatch shows to death, essentially. But also the proximity desire could be reaching out on social media. So what I'm trying to say here is that social media has changed the game of these parasocial attachments and relationships. Before, when I was growing up in the 80s, there wasn't, there were computers at school. You didn't have one in your house. There weren't smartphones. You couldn't just watch someone on TV and then go to social media and DM them and say hi and have the chance that they'd be like, oh, hi, thank you for the support. That didn't exist. That's something that exists now. But what's interesting is that there is a study, the first study on parasocial relationships by Donald Horton and Richard Wohl originated the concept of parasocial relationships in 1956 when they published their seminal article, which is called Mass Communication and Parasocial Interaction, Observations on Intimacy at a Distance. They published this in the journal Psychiatry. So I feel that here's where my experience and this information that I'm giving you comes in. I see that there is a hierarchy on social media, right? So there are people who enjoy me and find me fabulous, which thank you if you do. And then there are people that I look up to, and there are people that those people look up to. And it's just this hierarchy of people looking to these people in the media or on social media or on TV and putting them on a pedestal, holding them to a standard of, wow, I really like this person. I respect them. I value them. Let me try to talk with them. And so essentially, I guess what I'm boiling this down to is that for me, that doesn't impress me because we're all people. We're all, when I worked in the inpatient residential treatment facility that I worked in, there was a program for people who were doctors, nurses, lawyers, politicians. There was a professional program for people who struggled with addiction. And what that showed me and what it really taught me is that it doesn't matter who you are or what your label is. We're all human. We're all, come into the world the same. We all die. It's like, so for me, I guess I don't, because as a therapist, because I've seen just the bareness of humanity, and I see past the labels, and I see past these protective shields that people try to use to make themselves feel special and important, right? We all have titles, and sometimes we can use that to shield us and make us feel like we're special and important. But at the end of the day, we're all humans. And so I feel like with New Jersey, there's just a lack of humanity that I just no longer support. I just don't. A lack of humanity, a toxic, just, icky environment. And I just don't support it. I'm just not here for it. Also, I think that separate filming is so stupid. I think that as fans of the show, I understand that sometimes Bravo's in tough positions, but sometimes it feels like the talent, their needs are put first, right? Because I guess you need the talent. But then the fans, it's just like, well, you're just going to take whatever we give you. And it's like, but I don't think that's right. I don't know. Again, this is just my viewpoint, but I'm trying to think if there was anything else. Oh, here's the last thing that I wanted to say about like parasocial relationships and parasocial attachments is that it's also not all bad. It can be a very positive thing. So, these parasocial relationships are influenced by like social attraction. So there are people who love me, which thank you, who are, a lot of people who adore me are trauma survivors. I say things that really resonate with people, that really make people feel validated and heard and understood. And, I educate a lot. And so the point of all this is that viewers can experience a connection with the media and express, affection and gratitude and loyalty. And so there are positive aspects to this. I get messages from people saying, my therapist suggested I listen to your podcast, and that blows me away. Or I've been in therapy for 20 years and I never understood this concept until I heard you describe it the way that you did. These are examples of how parasocial interactions and attachments can be very positive, but it depends on the figure, right? I could easily abuse my power. I could become a cult leader for sure, easily. I have people who enjoy me and what I have to say. And if I did not have a good moral compass, I could absolutely take advantage of that, but I never will, because that is just not who I am. And so this is where you all come in terms of making your best decisions with who it is you're choosing to have these relationships with, who you're choosing to put your time and attention into, making sure they're worth your precious time, making sure it's something that's healthy for you and not a toxic mess. And so for me, I'm extricating myself from the toxic mess. Now, the last thing I will say before I move on to Summer House is that if something egregious comes up, something really of clinical significance, and it will benefit you all, I will talk about it. But it's got to be few and far between, and it really has to be something that makes sense for the definition that I just said. So I can't plan it, TBD. For now, I'm planning on watching, but honestly, that may change too. So I'm going to honor what I feel is best. I encourage you to honor what is best for you. And guess what? There's people listening to this who are like, I don't agree with any of this, and I love Jersey, and it's amazing. Great, mazel. I have no judgment, no shame. If you're loving Jersey, well, great. It is super entertaining. There's no shade. There's no shame. There's no judgment. Enjoy it. I just hope that you understand where I'm coming from. Okay, so now transition. I need a little water. Transitioning into Summer House. Let me just say that after last episode, I'm experiencing empathy fatigue. And empathy fatigue is a very real thing. Therapists experience it quite frequently, which is just when you are consistently, involved with difficult situations, or you have a friend, or you have someone who there's just have a lot going on all the time. Empathy fatigue is where it's just like, it's exactly what it sounds like. You're just tired of the drama, of feeling bad for people. It's just, there's a lot to it. And Summer House is giving me empathy fatigue, and I'm going to tell you why. This last episode was wild, number one. And number two, to find out that there are 5 more episodes of this between Carl and Lindsay, plus the reunion, I'm already exhausted. I'm just like, how much more of this can we all take? But 2 major things I'm going to talk about today that I feel like are going on. Number 1, when I post about Lindsay and Carl, or I talk about their relationship, I get so frustrated because people are either Team Lindsay or Team Carl. And it makes me wild because there are no teams, people. Everybody in a relationship plays a role. I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's famous people or not famous people, if they're on TV or not on TV. Everybody plays a role, with the exception of people who are in abusive relationships with people with personality disorders, narcissistic abuse, things like that. That's completely different. That is a one-sided, pathological, predatory situation. That is not a shared experience. But that's pretty much the only asterisk to this. I am so tired. And here's the thing. I'm tired of people giving me bad podcast reviews or saying something nasty on social media because I refuse to choose a team. That's insanity. Please stop. It's both. Watching Summer House, it is so clear that it is both a Lindsay and a Carl problem. It's not maybe always 50-50. It's not always equal, but it's both of them. And I just am so exhausted with people fighting with me about this. It's just a fact. It's like being a therapist and doing couples and marriage counseling and all this stuff. Both parties play a role. And I just don't understand people's commitment to ignoring one side or the other. I just don't understand that. Number 2, I feel one of the things that I talked about is that Carl seems, in my opinion, to struggle with conflict avoidance. So conflict avoidance is the act of withdrawing from conflict or avoiding conflict altogether. And here is where conflict avoidance, I just wanted to share a little bit. People who are in recovery from addiction, and Carl is a polarizing figure on this because he says that he's sober, but he's still using marijuana. Okay. And so people call that California sober, but California sober, if you're in the rooms, if you're in a 12-step program, that's not a thing. That's not, if you're in an outpatient program, if you're in any program, what they will tell you is a drug is a drug is a drug. That's it. And so I'm not here to judge anybody in terms of what works for them to keep them sober. Because if, Carl had a lot of issues with a lot of different substances, alcohol, cocaine, prescription pills, it was a lot of stuff. And his brother died from the disease of addiction, which tells me that it's very serious and it has a very serious genetic component. I mean, research studies show that. People get really irritated when I say that, but it is a fact. There are research studies to show genetic components. So here's my point, is that sometimes when we get sober, there can be those addictive patterns going on with our behaviors behind the scenes, independent of the substance, if that makes sense. So people use substances they want to avoid. I feel like addiction happens when humans are in a level of pain that they are no longer able to tolerate, and they feel that there's no other way to manage that pain. And so my point is that conflict avoidance, what I'm seeing Carl do now is a behavioral thread that is still left over from that kind of addiction history, because when we're in active addiction, we're not addressing things. We're sweeping everything under the rug until the rug is up to the ceiling. And so I mention this because I do feel that this is something that Carl needs to work on. And listen, I know he has a sponsor, he has a group. And so I'm, confident that he has people to call him out on things. Because by the way, that is why I'm so big on accountability and on holding people accountable, myself included, is because the only way to really grow and to become a better person and to work on your issues is to be real about what they are, about they call in the program character defects, or, we all have flaws. We all have, we're all imperfect. So being real about those underlying processes is the only way to really reach levels of growth and self-actualization and all of that. And so I feel that part of Carl's issue is he is still conflict avoidant. Now, people will blame Lindsay for that. And does she play a role? For sure. But guess what? Whether it's Lindsay or some other person, Carl needs to work on this issue, because Carl's talking to everyone about how he feels about Lindsay, except for Lindsay. And that's not acceptable. Now, there are reasons why conflict avoidance occurs. So I'm going to list some of those reasons. Number one, fear of being rejected and hurt, right? We're not going to want to be honest with somebody or address conflict if feel we're going to be rejected. We need human connection. I don't care what anybody says. No one is that tough that they can go at this thing called life alone. You just can't. It's not about toughness. It's just, it takes a village. Truly, there's a reason for that saying. Number two, mental health conditions such as social anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem, right? And what we know is that addiction and mental health issues, they're not separate. They go hand in hand. I don't know along the lines how they got separated. And, there are some programs that it's called dual diagnosis better than others. But I would argue that every person who has a substance abuse issue has a mental health issue. I mean, it's wild to me that, and listen, it may be transitory. Not everyone has the same mental health conditions, but I don't know. It's wild that it's separate to me. It's like whoever decided that your eyeballs and your teeth should be separate from the rest of your body in terms of treatment and insurance. What? Why? I don't get that. Another reason is evading a power struggle, right? If you know you're going to get into a power struggle and you just don't want to deal with that. Another one is difficulty discussing emotions, which again, people in recovery, it's super uncomfortable because you're not used to doing it. 5, people pleasing. I'm a reformed people pleaser right here. Okay, reformed. And 6 is fear of abandonment. So conflict avoidance is typically rooted in either self-preservation or self-serving reasons. So for example, a person trying to get out of conflict may be protecting themselves from unnecessary drama or trauma, but a partner who avoids talking about hurtful things that they said may be avoiding conflict to evade accountability. So I know this is a lot of information. And people have said, again, well, Lindsay, I'd be conflict avoidant if Lindsay was my partner too. Okay, well, fine. But then it's like, well, Carl made the choice to be with Lindsay. So what does that say about him? I hope you all understand what I'm saying is that when we pick a partner or when we make decisions, they all are made from a place of our experience. And if we're working on healing and we're working on growth, we tend to make better decisions that are best for us than if we're moving from a place of unconscious trauma. So for example, if, Lindsay grew up, she had a lot of attachment issues. Her mom left when she was 2. Her stepmother came in, and I loved seeing them together at the Lindsay's bridal shower, which was hard to watch, but that impacts Lindsay's decision-making and choices when choosing a partner, when we're choosing from a place of an abandonment wound that's still very active and we haven't worked on it. And I can just tell it hasn't been worked on because of her reactions to things. So here's what I'll say. Carl, when he broke the fourth wall, he's talking to Kyle and Amanda, and he's saying what we're all thinking. Like, she's going to see the show, bro. She's going to see it. So what are you doing? Like, what's your end game here? And I found it so fascinating that if he had not filmed that scene with his mom and his stepdad, he would have avoided telling her the truth altogether, which is wildly telling. And I could not believe not one other Bravo account picked up on that. I was like, that is the wildest bit of information. And again, maybe it just didn't seem relevant, but to my therapist brain, I'm like, that is conflict avoidance through and through. So he would have just went through with his marriage if he hadn't have filmed that scene with his mom and his stepdad. Dude, that is wild. I think that Carl is terrified of hurting Lindsay after gaining an understanding of the depth of her abandonment wounds in therapy, which is shitty for him to say, because I think if Lindsay watched that, it probably made her feel bad and broken. And the depth of her abandonment wounds, it doesn't make her not eligible for love. It makes Carl incapable of meeting those needs. And that's not necessarily Lindsay's problem. It's just these two clearly should not have gotten married, clearly. And I cannot even imagine what we're going to be seeing in the next upcoming episodes. So even though that's a Carl issue, I do feel that. Oh, and one other thing I'll say, I'm sorry, is the fact of the matter is this type of avoidance, it just does not yield positive results. I've struggled with, PTSD and anxiety most of my life. And what I'll say is that when you're avoiding something, it feels worse than it needs to be. There's an emotional buildup, there's all this cognitive dissonance, and then you do the thing that you're avoiding, and it's like you feel so much better. So avoidance doesn't yield positive results. It's just better to rip the Band-Aid off. I'm telling you that right now. So going back to Lindsay's abandonment wounds, I've said this before, is that I feel for little Lindsay, because when we don't get the love we need from a parent, it has really wide-ranging and long-lasting impacts on us, especially in our adult relationships. And again, it was a good reminder seeing her with her stepmom, is that family transcends genetics. Family is not always blood. And in fact, a lot of people have been very traumatized and wounded by their blood family. So it's just a beautiful reminder that love is love and it transcends genetics. So here's where Lindsay then comes in, and this becomes problematic. When Carl finally shares, he cries, he's saying he's overwhelmed. Lindsay's like a deer in headlights. You can tell she's stuck in her own hurt. And so she's unable to attend to him. And I think that what happens is there's this pattern of avoidance followed by a lack of emotional support on both ends. And it just leads to these festering wounds in their relationship. That will erode a relationship. So if you avoid conflict and then you wait until the conflict is super, super bad, you have this conflict, but you're not able to meet each other, hear each other, communicate, or meet each other's needs, that's a disaster, because then it just encourages more conflict avoidance. And then it's like I said, you're sweeping things under the rug, and before you know it, the rug is up to the ceiling and you can't walk in the room and it's not usable anymore. This is what we are seeing here, in my opinion. So the last thing that I'm going to say is Carl brought up something super interesting about how his mom is his best friend and he shares his fights with her. And I just wanted to say that sharing details of marital fights with loved ones can be a very slippery slope. Having a parent who's your best friend can also muddy boundaries. Here's the thing. Some people don't have the ability to be best friends with their parent because their parent isn't capable of it. And so if you do have a parent who's capable of it, I think that's amazing. But all couples have different expectations about boundaries and privacy. And so remember last week when I talked about, when you are in a committed relationship, whether it's a marriage or just a committed long-term relationship, I'm not saying just, you know what I mean, but all couples have different expectations about boundaries and sharing things with family. And this is also important to be on the same page about when it comes to fights and arguments, because listen, all couples fight. And not all fights look the same. But if a fight is particularly toxic or unhealthy and you talk to a family member about it, and then that's going to influence what they think of the partner. And then if you just try to go back to normal, well, the other person can't do that. So I think it's just an understanding of the consequences of things that we share. And I am all for getting support. Please don't misunderstand that. But I also think that your partner, you two are the primary relationship that you have to manage. And whether it's a parent or a sibling or a best friend, I think that it's just important to be mindful of crossing those boundaries. That's all. Okay. So the last thing that I'm going to say, I'm going to talk about Paige and Paige. I think I just made up a new name for Paige and Craig. Paige. That was an accident. But Paige and Craig, it was so wild for me to bring up my perception of them on social media, because this just goes to show that our perspective is our reality. I watched Paige and Craig, in my opinion, crucially discuss vulnerable issues. As challenging as those issues may be, I think they were transparent. I think they were honest. I think they led with love. I think they had a healthy, open line of communication and the mature understanding that sometimes love isn't enough to make a relationship work. But here's what's wild. Our perception is our reality, in that there are people who got really upset that I felt this way, and they feel that Paige is leading Craig on. And I just think it speaks volumes about our perception as our reality, because I see Paige as a very independent woman who her career's never been hotter. She's gorgeous. She's talented. She's, famous. She's got brand deals. She's got all these things going for her. And there are these people saying, well, but Craig wants to marry her, so she should just give in to that. And it's like, what? Is this 1950? Like, what is happening? Craig is a catch, but so is Paige. Can we not forget that? I just, I don't know. I think that, listen, I would love to see them make it, because I do think they're endgame. I think they're the real deal. I think they're lovely together. But just because Paige is a woman and Craig wants to get married doesn't mean that she needs to give everything up and just pack up her life and move to Charleston. I think that's a little bit misogynistic, if I'm being honest. And so it just goes to show that, I think the people who are overly siding with Craig, not siding is the wrong word, but maybe they're overly relating to Craig, are people who have had their hearts broken and people who have had people not want to commit and things like that. And yes, that's super painful, but I don't know. I guess I just see it a little bit differently. And I just wanted to share my thoughts on that. So this is going to be the end of this episode. I'm glad I was able to do a full hour for you all today. Yes, I'm so happy I'm back. As always, thank you to those of you who have just been so wonderful and supporting me. Please go and leave a 5-star review. I promise you it makes a difference. Thank you so much. I appreciate you all. Again, wherever you're listening to this podcast, There will be a link to my Linktree. There will be a link to the Spreaker Supporters Club. Because the thing that I didn't mention at the top of the show, which I'll mention now, is that when I'm on my breaks, I will do at least one episode a month for the Spreaker supporters. So if you are unhappy that I'm taking a break and you still want episodes, that is the way to get them. If you're not interested, that's totally fine. As I mentioned, there are lots of ways to support me, and I appreciate them all. So please let me know your feedback on some of the things I mentioned at the top of the show, things that I should cover. I want to make these next 8 episodes bangers for you all. So please, I'd love to hear your feedback. Thank you so much. And please remember to take care of yourselves and each other. Disclaimer. Posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish Therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and are not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in the YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read here on YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.